My name is Joe, and I'm going to go through a class on what you might do if your back's a little bit irritated or aggravated, and some yoga positions that might help with that, and just some movement. So for this, you will want some yoga blocks and a strap. We're not going to go into deep forward folds, so the blocks will help bring the ground up to us. The strap will lengthen the distance of your arms. When you feel ready, you can come to standing near the front of the mat, having blocks out in front of you. Blocks are far enough away from your feet that when you pivot at your hips, your shoulders will be on top of the blocks around there, and you can always adjust things. But when you're ready, go ahead and line yourself up standing. Feet a comfortable distance width apart, knees facing forward, second toes facing forward, knees tracking towards second toes or thereabouts. And you can play with shifting the weight around in your feet a bit, coming into a place where the weight feels relatively centered between the front and the back. Move your toes, starting to wake up the muscles of your feet. Maybe lift the toes up, feeling the muscles of the feet engaging some with the toes. Exhale, go ahead and release. And then maybe pull the toes back towards your heels. And notice how your arches really lift up when you do that. Exhale, release. Wiggle your toes again. And then as you're ready, you can lift the toes up, the arches lifting some here, pressing down through 3 imaginary points of the feet just to help us to find a mat for our feet. So those points will be right behind the big toe, the middle of the heel, and right behind the baby toe. And just pressing down through these points of the feet, these 3 points, and pulling the front 2 points behind the big toe and the baby toe towards the heel to help lift the arches up. And that's just to help to evenly distribute the weight around your feet while still engaging the arches. If it works for you, spread the toes nice and wide apart and lower the toes back down to the ground, anchoring the toes into the earth, all 10 of them, as you press down through these 3 points of the feet relatively evenly, and maybe pull the front 2 points towards the heel, trying to engage the arches. Feel the leg muscles hugging to the bone, but the knee joint soft. The muscles around the hips hugging in, including pelvic floor muscles lifting in and up. Feel the tops of the hips and back lifting in and up a little bit here. A little bit of an arch in the back and keeping the hips from tucking or tilting under. So just a small arch. At the same time, low ribs hug in and up so you don't overarch the back. So finding that balance between a little arch in the low back, but core also engaged, not too big of an arch in the low back. Hands together in front of the heart, shoulders together on the back, head and neck stacked above the rest of the spine. And just feel the breath moving through you here. So notice the air on your nostrils and feel the lungs moving with the breath. The lungs expanding out on the inhales and softening back in with your exhales. And as you settle into the flow of the breath, with your exhales, anchor from the hips down through the feet into the earth. And with your inhales, feel an expansion through the torso, maybe the spine lifting a little bit up out of the hips, but also a general sense of fullness through the torso. On your exhale, settling from the hips down through the feet into the earth, but also settling the skin on top of this fullness you've created in the torso. Breathe. And let your awareness rest in the flow of the breath. Throughout class, I invite you to maintain your connection to the breath. And we will just start with an Om. So if you'd like, you go ahead and exhale here. Inhale fully. Om. And then with your next exhale, go ahead, just release your hands to the sides. Inhale, arms can come wide and reach up high. Exhale, lowering the arms back to the sides. Inhale, arms come wide and reach up high. And then with your next exhale, your hands to your hips. With your hands on your hips, rooting from the hips down through the feet into the earth. Inhale, lengthen the spine out of the hips. And then with your knees soft, staying with your breath, start to tilt forward. So the tilting is going to take more than one breath. Notice when your back wants to round, stop there. Knees a little soft, hips press back, spine lengthen forward. And then perhaps lower the hands to the blocks underneath the shoulders, trying to keep the extension in the spine. If you want to, you could straighten the legs if that feels okay for you. But whether your legs are bent or straight, feel the thighs and the hips lengthening back a little bit, feel the armpits and the chest stretching forward, feel the breath moving through you, anchoring through those 3 points of the feet, and feeling that lightness, that lift through the arches of the feet. And then with your next exhale, if you want to, Keeping your spine lengthening out the hips, walking your hands over to the right side, trying not to move your hips. And here you'll notice the right side of the torso is contracting, the left side is expanding. Breathe. And then as you're ready, go ahead and walk the blocks back into center. And then as you feel ready, walking your blocks over to the left side. And again, try not to let the hips move. Lengthen the spine out of the hips. Noticing the contraction on the left side, the expansion on the right side. Breathe. Maybe softening the upper back right between the shoulders a little bit. And then go ahead and coming back into center with the blocks. And then as you're ready, perhaps with the knees a bit soft, shifting the weight into the back of your heels a bit more, to bring the hands to the hips, and with a nice long spine, come all the way up to standing. Feel the breath moving through you here. You can just release the hands to the sides. And then we're going to move the blocks. So again, knees a little bit long spine to grab the blocks, lift them up, and turn and face the long end of the mat, and coming down the same way. So knees soft, tilting at the hips, a nice long spine, put the blocks down, and then come back up. When you feel ready, open the feet nice and wide apart. Line your feet up with each other, hands to your hips, and then with your knees soft, we're gonna heel-toe the feet however wide apart as works for you, and line your feet up with each other here, knees and second toes facing generally forward. And again here, try to press down through the 3 points of your feet relatively evenly, press down through all 10 toes, and see if you can lift up through the arches of the feet. And as you feel that lift through the arches of the feet, feel the leg muscles hugging in from the feet to your hips, and feel the muscles around the hips hugging in here. Settle the hips back over your heels a little bit, and as you press from the hips down through the feet into the earth, feel the spine lengthening up out of the hips. Feel the breath flowing through you here, and then if you want to, your hands can come into a T, and you can feel the shoulders gently moving toward each other on the back. Trikonasana variation, breathing here. Nice, full, deep breaths. And then as you feel ready, bring your hands back to the hips, heel-toe your feet in a little bit more for stability, but you're still perhaps working a little bit. Bend your knees here, lengthen the spine, and again, like before, with that nice long spine, start to tilt at the hips and fold forward. Bring your hands to the blocks underneath the shoulders, feel the thighs and the hips lengthening back, feel the armpits and the chest lengthening forward. If you want to, you can flip the blocks to medium height here, and walk your hands out in front of the shoulders here. And with your knees bent and your hands a little bit in front of the shoulders, feel the shoulders gently hugging toward each other on the back, and start to shift the weight back into your heels, into the back of your feet. As you stretch your hips up, back, away from your hands here. Breathe. If you want to, you can even lift the front of your foot up off the ground or get really light there with your knees bent. Be careful not to flip over backwards, and really just stretching the hips up, back, away from your hands, getting traction in the low back, doing a functional forward fold. As you feel ready, bring the weight back into the front of the foot, maybe as much weight in the front of the foot as in the back of the foot. Perhaps straightening the legs here, but still keeping the thighs pressing back a little bit, spine lengthening forward out of the hips, and maybe bring the hands back underneath the shoulders here. If you want to, you could even play with flipping blocks to lower height or bringing the hands to the ground, but perhaps still pressing the thighs and the hips back, lengthening armpits and chest forward, and finding some space in the spine. Breathe. Soften your knees. Shift your weight back into your heels. Maybe flip the blocks up to the highest height. And then as you're ready with your weight back in your heels, hands to the hips, nice long spine, come all the way up. Knees soft, heel-toe your feet in towards each other. And then shaking out the legs. And again, remember, when you grab the blocks to move them, knees soft, pivoting at the hips, get the blocks, bring them back up, and then changing position. So knees soft, pivoting at the hips, putting the blocks back down, and coming all the way back up. Standing here, again, near the front of the mat, shoulder distance away from the blocks when you're pivoting forward, hands together in front of the heart, shoulders together on the back, feel the breath moving through you. And then as you're ready, exhale, release the hands to the sides. Inhale, arms come wide, reach up high, nice long spine, fold forward. You can bring your arms to airplane, and keeping the extension in the spine, go ahead and bring your hands down to the blocks. Knees can be a bit soft here, thighs and hips pressing back, armpits and chest lengthening forward, nice full deep breaths. And then from here, you might move the blocks a little bit closer to your feet, step the right foot in between the blocks, and step the left foot back, however far feels comfortable for you. Right knee on top of the ankle, tracking towards your second toe, and maybe wiggling that left foot back as far as works for you. Press down through both feet evenly here. Hug into your hips, and perhaps you'll feel the outer right hip moving a bit back, left hip a little bit forward. Feel the spine expanding out of the hips, and feel the breath flowing through you here. Nice, full, deep breaths. Feel free to stay in this version of the pose, or if you want to, you can slowly and carefully bend the back knee, lowering the left knee down, maybe pointing those toes, and again, pressing down through the feet, hugging into the hips here, maybe letting the hips settle a bit more down forward, maybe lengthening the spine out of the hips. You might even want to walk your hands up to the right knee here. Breathe. And then as you're ready, you can go ahead and bring the hands back down to the blocks, curl the left toes under, lift the left knee up. Shift the weight more into the right foot from here. And as you're ready, slide, wiggle, scoot, step the left foot forward. Notice even though the blocks are back by my feet, I'm trying to stretch the spine out of my hips here. And then bending your knees and stepping, sliding, wiggle, scooting the right foot back. Left knee on top of the ankle, tracking towards the second toe. Right foot going as back as far as works for you. And here, hugging in, pressing down through the feet evenly, hugging into your hips, and feel the spine extending. Now this left hand, the one that's on the outside of my left foot, if it feels better for you, you can bring that hand inside the leg. So you can always do this lunge also with both hands inside the left leg. For a lot of people, that's just going to feel better for them, and either way, so whichever feels better for you. Again, if you would like to, you can lower the right knee down to the ground carefully, pointing the right toes, pressing down from your feet to your hips here, and lengthening the spine out of the hips here. Breathe. If you'd like to come a little bit more upright through the torso, maybe stretching out the back thigh a bit more, you can walk your hands up to the left thigh. Nice, full, deep, complete breaths. And then as you're ready, go ahead and lower the hands back down if you want to. Curl the back toes under, lift the back knee up, and then shifting the weight into the left foot, slide, wiggle, scoot, step the right foot forward. Nice long spine, lengthening out of the hips here. Soften your knees. You may need to adjust where you are on the mat. Breathing here, nice, full, deep breaths. And then as you're ready from here, again, thighs and hips lengthening back, armpits and chest lengthening forward. Slowly start to walk your feet back a little bit more if it feels good for your shoulders. And notice the place where your heels start to get light on the ground. So you're going to stop at that place where the heels feel a little bit light. You're going to shift the weight back into the heels, knees maybe a little bit soft, and really stretch the hips up, back, away from your hands here. And then from here, if you'd like, this is a downward facing dog variation. We're going to flip the blocks to medium height so they're more stable. And then you're going to soften your knees again and maybe keep on walking the feet back. So now perhaps more weight is in your arms than in your feet, and that's why you want the blocks in a more stable position. And then you're going to bend your knees a bit here, knees as wide apart as your feet. And with your knees as wide apart as your feet and bent, you're going to press the hips up, back, past the knees if that feels good for your shoulders. Stretching the low back out of the hips here. And being careful your hips are not tucking under. So you're trying not to let the hips tuck under, but instead lengthen through the spine. With your next exhale, coming down to all fours, lowering down the knees carefully. You can move the blocks a bit to the side here. And then you can bring the hands to the ground. And if palms flat does not work for you, feel free to play with different hand positions. If palms are flat, maybe lines of the wrist relatively parallel with the front edge of the mat, fingers spreading nice and wide apart, and weight towards the front of the hands. And then inhale, you can stretch the spine nice and long here. Exhale, you can gently round the back and see how that feels for you. And inhale, you can arch the back, head and tailbone up to the sky. If this movement feels good for you, you can continue to go back and forth, lining this movement up with the movement of the breath. The rhythm of the movement matches the rhythm of the breath. But if it doesn't, then just come into an extended spine. After a few rounds of this, we are going to all meet in a nice extended spine. So just thighs and hips again, stretching back, armpits and chest stretching forward, perhaps softening the upper back right between the shoulders. Now, one thing I want to mention is the extended spine isn't like flat back, which is hips tucked under a little bit typically. There is typically a little bit of an arch in the back, but it's teeny, teeny, tiny in extended spine position. Feel free to stay here. If it it works for you and you're feeling pretty strong today, engage your core so the back stays in this extended spine position, and start to shift your shoulders forward past your fingers. And just notice how this feels for you. And again, feel free to play with shifting the shoulders back over the wrist and then forward if that is where you're at. If this is not too much for your wrist, if you're feeling strong here, then keep the length in the spine. Exhale and bend your elbows, keeping your upper arms perhaps close to the torso, and then pressing back up. Exhale, bend the elbows only to where shoulders are level with elbows. Inhale and press back up. Exhale, bend the elbows, shoulders level with elbows. Holding here, you might have to wiggle the knees back a little bit and then just ease your way down to your belly when you feel ready. Rest your head on the hands. Gently rock your hips a bit from side to side if that feels good for you. Eventually coming into center with your hips. Press down through the hips, stretch long through the legs, knees facing the ground, feet on the ground, breathing here. And then from here, if you like, you can bring the arms along the sides, fingers pointing towards the toes. Palms can be up or down. Keep pressing down through the hips. Inhale, lifting up to the shoulders and the chest. Exhale and lower back down. Inhale, lift up to the shoulders and the chest. Exhale and lower back down. Inhale, lifting up to the shoulders and the chest, holding this variation of Shalabhasana. Now, when my back is irritated, I try to keep my feet on the ground. So if your feet are floating up, maybe press them down. I also try to press or root down through the hips really strongly here, and I stretch back through the feet and the legs. Breathe. Also, if your back is really bothering you, you might not lift up to the chest so much. You might just play with lifting the shoulders up and down. Coming to what works for you, doing what feels best in your body, and breathe. And then as you're ready, you can lower all the way down if you lift it up. Head on the hands, gently rock the hips a bit from side to side. And making your way into center and coming back into a child's pose. Breathe. Nice, full, deep breaths. And then as you feel ready, go ahead and grab your block. Come up to a high kneel for a moment, which is hips above your knees. Knees close together, open your feet apart, and see how it feels to sit back on the block with the block the highest height. And if this feels okay for you, you might want to, because that can be a little bit unstable, you might want to grab both blocks and sit back on two blocks here. Now, if this feels super, super comfortable for you on two blocks, then you can start to take away blocks. So I usually like to sit on one block at medium height. And for me, that feels comfortable for me. And what I mean by that is there's no discomfort or pain in my knee joints. If there is, you want to be higher, or you might just leave this pose out entirely, Virasana. And just holding here, breathing, trying to make sure both hips are even on whatever you're sitting on. Now, if you can sit between your feet on the ground, no pain in your knees, feet relatively close to the hips, both hips nice and heavy, go ahead, do that, breathe. Virasana. And then from here, what I like to do is come to the edge of the block or blocks and being careful if there's two blocks to not move them. Walk the hands back behind me, and I do lift the hips up, and I lengthen my tailbone towards the knees. So the motion or the direction is like I'm going to tuck my hips under, but since the angle of my knees and my torso is what it is, my hips aren't really tucking under, but it's moving in that direction if you're confused about what I just said. It's like you're tucking your hips under. It's just because of your angle of your body. My hips are not actually tucking under. If they were, they'd be lifting up off the block. Breathe. And then as you're ready, go ahead and come back upright. And again, you could be on two blocks. You could be on one block at medium height, or for the next position, and I'm coming all the way off the block. I like the block at the lowest height for me. And again, floor is comfortable is also a possibility. So Baddha Konasana. And Baddha Konasana, feet together, knees opening wide apart, sitting up nice and tall. So when my back is bothering me, I don't do too many sitting forward bends, but I do sitting hip openers, and I usually do them elevated, so my thighs and my hips and my back all have space to move. So starting with Baddha Konasana, breathing here. Feel free to stay here this whole time, or we're going to move around through the legs a bit. So the next place I would come into from here is cross-legged position with the right leg in front of the left, and just sitting up nice and tall and breathing here. And then from here, I might move into Siddhasana. So I'd open the knees wider apart, right foot either in front of the left, or I'll sometimes do a tuck of the foot. So right foot tucking over the left foot, sitting up nice and tall here. Lengthen the spine out of the hips. Breathe. And then from here, after hanging out here for a bit, depending on how my knees feel on a particular day, I might come into Ardha Padmasana, half lotus position. So here, I lift the leg up. I'll be careful and slowly try to lower carefully, no pain in the joint, the right knee down towards the ground, weight even in both hips, and sit up nice and tall here. Now, Padmasana, Ardha Padmasana, these can be really precarious for knee joints. But the reason they feel really good in backs is because the foot on the leg is rooting that thigh down, which lets you lift the spine up out of the hips a little bit. And for me, that feels really good on the back. But I also have knee injuries, history of knee injuries. And so my knees are feeling off. I will not do this position. Breathing wherever you're at. And then slowly coming out of this, bringing the soles of the feet together, opening the knees apart, sitting up nice and tall, Baddha Konasana. And then Sukhasana, cross-legged position. Again, left leg crossing in front. Again, if that works for you, sitting up nice and tall here. And then if you would like, coming into Siddhasana, which is opening the knees wider apart, left foot in front of the right. And from here, if it feels good for you, you can always tuck that left foot in. And I hold either Sukhasana, the feet closer in, knees closer in position, or Siddhasana, usually for a few breaths. But I won't necessarily hold both of them the equal amount of time. Coming into the one that feels better for my hips and just sitting up nice and tall. And again, depending on how my knees have felt on a particular day, keeping the knee joint closed. And what I mean by knee joint closed, keeping the left calf against the thigh, lifting the leg up, bringing my left foot into the right hip crease or thereabouts, and then slowly trying to lean a bit into this left hip, bringing the left knee towards the ground. And you do typically want the left knee grounded into something. So on the ground or into a block, you don't want the left knee hanging. That's a lot of pressure for the knee joint. And then from here, sitting up nice and tall. And again, this rooting down of the thigh for me feels really lovely in the back. And you can do that kind of some other ways by pressing hands into thighs and lengthening up in other positions. So again, if this isn't accessible for you, no worries. It's not always accessible for me either. Okay. When you feel ready, leaning over to the right side a little bit, taking that left foot off, feet together, knees apart, sitting up nice and tall here. And then coming, if you would like, off the block. You could put the block over to the side, legs forward out in front of you, knees and toes pointing up to the sky. And from here, lassoing a strap around the ball of your feet and just pulling back on the strap and sitting up nice and tall. So in some ways, this is more like Dandasana as opposed to the forward fold. And what I'm really making sure here is that my hips aren't tucking under. So if I need to bend my knees a little bit to lift the low back up out of the hips, I'll do that. Nice, full, deep breaths. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and release the hands from the strap, put the strap over to the side, come to the front of the mat, make sure there's plenty of mat back behind me, bring my hands back behind me, and another variation of Dandasana, press down to the legs, untuck my hips, lift up to the low back, open to the chest, open to the throat, breathing here. Feel super, super free to stay here with your hips on the ground, or if your shoulders feel really good, I also like to stretch out the front of the body when my back is bothering me some. So you might press down to the heels and lift your hips up. You might even point the toes and lower the soles of the feet down. Breathing here. And then exhale, go ahead and lower the hips back down. From here, maybe lowering down to your elbows, pressing down to the legs, lift up to the chest. Head and neck can stay in line with the rest of the spine, or if it feels okay for your neck to let the head go back a bit here, you can. And then if you want to, from here, you can walk your elbows towards your feet a little bit more, lifting up to the chest, and maybe with the head tilted back if that feels good for you, lowering the head down towards the ground. Breathe. And then from here, just easing your way all the way onto your back, making sure there's a strap nearby.
and coming into a Tadasana on your back. And so what I mean by that, if leg straight feels okay for you, you're going to keep your legs straight. If not, you'll bend your knees. And with your legs straight or your knees bent, you're going to shift the weight lower in your hips and back, balance between the right and the left side. The tops of your hips will lift up a little bit. There's a little arch there, enough that you might be able to slide a hand underneath the top of the hips and back. Shoulders nice and heavy, balanced between the right and the left side. Neck lifting up a little bit. Again, you might be able to slide a hand underneath your neck. Back of your head with your chin in neutral or slightly lifted nice and heavy. And again, feel free to do this with knees bent if that feels better for your back, or with legs straight. If your legs are straight, you're going to press down through the thighs here, knees and toes pointing towards the sky. Breathe. And if your legs are straight, you will keep your left leg straight and bend the right knee. If your legs are bent, you might keep the right knee bent and straighten the left leg if it works for you. If not, keep the left leg bent. From here, you're going to grab the strap, and actually I'm going to bend the left knee for a moment because it's just easier to grab feet with straps with the legs bent. Strap can be any piece of fabric that's not too stretchy. And from here, what you'll do is you'll catch the right ball of your foot with the strap. You'll lower your right leg towards the ground some straight, enough that your hips aren't tucking under. So if I pull the leg in right away, my hips will tuck under. The top of my hips will come back to the ground. So I'm going to lower the foot closer to the ground, weight lower in the hips, and again, maybe this left leg straight, knee and toe pointing up to the sky, anchoring down through that leg. Keep the natural curves of the spine, weight lower in the hips, and just start to pull the right leg in towards you, however much works for you, that you can keep the natural curves of the spine. Breathe. Nice, full, deep breaths. So if I had more space on the left side, I might actually open my arm to the left in a minute. But if you don't have that space on the left side like me, you can also bring your left hand to your left hip as a reminder to keep that hip on the ground. With the left hip staying on the ground, perhaps slowly opening the right leg to the right. Now, if you notice your hips start to turn, if that left hip starts to lift up off the ground, you can back off of this and not go as far. Or instead of doing this with the leg straight and the foot in the strap, you can bring the foot down, and with your foot on the ground, you could come into tree pose on your back, opening the right knee to the right. So again, whichever version works for you, feeling the breath moving through you. And then as you feel ready, go ahead and bring the right leg back up. Again, making sure the weight's lower in the hips, the tops of the hips lifting, pulling that right leg in towards center, also pressing down through the shoulders and the back of the head. Breathe. And then when you feel ready, you can bend the left knee, take the right foot out of the strap, place that right foot down, trying to keep your hips nice and centered here. And then taking the left foot into the strap, maybe straightening that leg, lowering it low enough or moving it away from you so the weight's still lower on your hips. If you want to straighten the right leg, right knee and toe pointing up to the sky, you can, pressing down to that leg, and then start to pull the left leg in towards you. But if your hips start to tuck under, if the top of your hips start to press into the ground, then maybe you've gone too far today. So just pulling that leg in however much works for you. Breathe. Nice, full, deep breaths. And when you hold the strap with the left hand, when you're moving the leg, typically what's instructed is arm relatively straight, grab the strap, but only someplace where you can press the shoulder into the ground. Right arm can open to the right side, or right hand can be on the hip, and keeping the right hip down, left leg going to the left. Breathe. And depending, I might end up hitting the wall with this foot. And if I do, I can actually press the foot into the wall, which feels really good. So if there's an obstacle in your way, sometimes the obstacle can actually be something to assist you. So sometimes you can reframe an obstacle to be an assist. Breathe. And then as you feel ready, go ahead and coming back upright with that foot, bringing that foot back in. And then when you feel ready again, trying to make sure the weight's lower in the hips, pulling that left leg in towards you. Breathe. And then go ahead, bending that knee, bending the right knee, trying to keep your hips relatively still as you move the legs, knees bent, feet on the ground. Bring your hands to the thighs, press the thighs away from you, gently swaying the knees perhaps a bit from side to side here. And then from here, come back in the center, weight still lower in the hips, with your right knee pointing towards, actually I'm going to do right side first. So left knee staying pointing towards the sky, just because you can see it better. Walk your right foot over to the right a bit more, and then let your right knee fall towards your left foot, stretching the right knee towards the left foot, but also trying to keep your right hip on the ground. Breathing here. And then go ahead and bring that right knee back up and second side. So right knee stays pointing towards the sky, left foot can go to the left, and then left knee can fall towards your right foot, keeping the left hip on the ground. And actually, even though the left knee is falling towards the right foot, you're stretching the left knee forward with the left hip on the ground. Breathing here. Lifting the left knee back up, feet about hip distance width apart, knees and toes pointing towards the sky. Have a block nearby somewhere, so grabbing that. Bring your arms straight along the sides, palms face down, fingers pointing towards the toes. Feel the weight even in your hips, balance between the right and the left foot. Feel the weight lower your hips, balance between the right and the left side. Tops of your hips lifting up a little bit, shoulders pressing down, neck lifting up, back of your head, chin in neutral or slightly lifted. Shrug the shoulders up towards your ears, and then wiggle the shoulders underneath you a bit more, perhaps starting to lift the spine in between the shoulders up, coming into a larger arch of the back. So your spine may not be in natural curves anymore. You might be arching your back some here. Breathe. Feel free to stay here with your hips on the ground, or if it feels good for you, gaze towards the sky to protect your neck, pressing down through the shoulders and the back of the head, pressing down through your feet. Inhale, stretch your knees forward and let your hips float up. Exhale and lowering the hips back down. Inhale, stretch your knees forward and float the hips up. Exhale and lower the hips back down. Inhale, stretch your knees forward and float the hips up. Holding here, grab that nearby block, lowest height, and perhaps slide it underneath your hips. And the block can be higher on the hips or lower on the hips, finding a place that feels comfortable for you. If a block going across the middle of your hips doesn't work for you, you can actually grab 2 blocks and put each block underneath your butt cheeks. Sometimes for some people, a block going across the back of their spine, their hips and nerve, and that does not feel comfortable. So if it feels better for you to have 2 blocks and the blocks underneath your butt cheeks, that's also an option here. Breathe. You can bring the arms along the sides, palms facing towards the sky in an airplane position. This is a supported bridge. So you are still a bit active. You're still pressing down through the feet, pressing down through the hips, balance between the right and the left side, pressing down through the shoulders, lifting up through the chest, and pressing down through the head as you breathe here. Nice, full, deep breaths. Keep your hips nice and heavy and anchored, maybe lifting the right foot up off the ground, maybe stretching the right foot towards the sky. So breathing here if this feels good for you. And then if you want to, go ahead and bend the right knee, set the right foot back on the ground. Try not to let the hips move a lot, trying to keep the weight even between your hips. And then as you're ready, left knee bent, you can lift the foot up, you can keep the knee bent, or you can stretch the foot towards the sky. Only as much as feels good for you. And again, more than straightening the legs. So I'd rather have you have the knee bent and the hips nice and even and pressing down. You only straighten the leg if you can do that for now. And again, depending on what you're working on, you might emphasize holding different things stable and moving different parts. Since we're working low back here, I'm really having you focus on keeping hips stable. Breathe. Go ahead and actually keep the left leg lifted if you want to lift the right leg up. And again, both knees can be bent here, just feeling the hips really anchoring down. Or if you want to start to straighten the legs, you can. And you might not have the legs all the way straight. It might be someplace in between. Wherever you're at, again, shoulders anchored down, hips rooting down, chest lifting up. Feel the breath moving through you. This is sometimes called sill position. It's a shoulder stand prep. And then from here, you can bend the knees and lower the feet back to the ground in a supported bridge, pressing down to the feet. Now from here, if it feels good in your body, start to slide the right leg forward. Stop if at any point your back, this bothers your back. But if it works for you, you can straighten the right leg all the way. Knees and toes might point towards the sky here. And again, anchoring down through both hips and just stretching out the front of the hip flexors a little bit here. Breathe. And then you can go ahead and slide the right foot back in and starting to slide the left foot forward. And again, stopping if there's any pulling on the back, if your hips feel uneven, if it's hard to keep the weight lower in your hips and the hips pressing down, breathe. And again, maybe sliding both legs straight, but this gets a little bit more complicated for a lot of people. You might even hug the legs in towards each other. Breathing wherever works, only doing what works for you. So if your legs are maybe a little bit straighter, but not all the way straight, but that feels really good for you, that's fine. This is moving towards a supported version of the Ashtanga version of bridge. If you want to also, you can point the feet here, have the feet a little bit apart. In Ashtanga, you actually do a little bit of external rotation through the hips, which for me, when my back is bothering me, doesn't feel great in this position. But again, just throwing that out there that it is something that's done. And then as you feel ready, you can walk the feet back in. And then when you feel ready, you can slide the block out from underneath your hips. Lower the hips to the ground. Press the thighs away from you, gently swaying the knees a little side to side, getting a little movement in your hips. And then if you want to, from here, you can go ahead and come back to center here and cross the right ankle over the left knee. Pressing the thighs away from you here. Nice full deep breaths. Weight still lower in the hips, natural curves of the spine. From here, you can move the hands just someplace comfortable, or you can stretch the arms back for the wall behind you. Maybe walking your left foot over to the left, and then with your right foot, maybe pulling that left thigh towards the ground. Stretching the left knee towards the front of the room here. Breathe. Nice, full, deep breaths. And then as you feel ready, you can go ahead and unwind into center. And the second side, so lowering the hands down, right foot on the ground, left ankle crosses over the right knee, hands to the thighs, gently pressing the thighs away from you here. Weight lower in the hips, balance between the right and the left side, breath flowing through you. Nice, full, deep breaths. Arms coming someplace comfortable, but if you want to, you can also stretch them back for the wall behind you. That feels like a little bit of lengthening, more lengthening in the low back. Right foot can go to the right, and then with your left foot, drawing the right knee towards the ground, stretching the right knee towards the wall forward out in front of you. Breathe. Nice, full, deep breaths. And then as you feel ready, go ahead and come back or unwind to center. Feel the natural curves of the spine, feel the hands on the thighs, press the thighs away from you, maybe gently swaying a bit. And then coming into center here, bring your feet together, let the knees open apart. Press your feet actively in towards each other for a moment, really engaging. And then if you want to hold here, go ahead and grab your blocks. Sliding the blocks underneath your legs in a place that's supportive, and so that means you can also flip blocks up higher. And just breathing here. And again, small arch of the back, but sometimes sometimes people come here and their back is really arched. If your back is really arched, lengthen the hips, lengthen the tailbone, do a little tuck under. Not that you end up in a tuck, but just so your back isn't quite so arched. Arms wherever is comfortable, Supta Baddha Konasana. Breathing here. And if this is really comfortable for you, you can do final relaxation in this position as opposed to Shavasana. So if this isn't comfortable for you, you might want to go ahead and straighten the legs. And you also might want to have something underneath your thighs and your knees here. So again, if your back is bothering you, having something to support, and I'm again just using the blocks since they're here, underneath the thighs, that will sometimes let some people's backs release out a bit more. You might also just want to have your knees bent, feet on the ground. Arms can be wherever is comfortable. Eyes soft or closed. Feel the breath flowing through you. Feel the air on your nostrils. Feel the lungs moving with the breath. And notice every place where your body is touching the floor. And with your exhales, just letting yourself soften, letting yourself release, letting yourself let go. So continuing this process of just feeling the floor underneath you and letting yourself relax into the support. Maybe with time, notice if any muscles still feel like they're working or engaged. And again, with your exhales, just seeing if you can get these muscles to let go, to relax, and to release. Let your bones feel heavy. Let your skin feel soft. And whenever you're as relaxed as you're going to get, let go of the conscious control of the breath. And just let yourself rest here. I'm going to end the video, but I want you to stay here as long as you want to. And 5 to 10 minutes is a good starting benchmark. But if you want to stay longer, feel free to stay longer. When you're done, you'll just start by moving small parts of your body. A lot of times people will wiggle fingers and toes and then expand into larger movements. And just as slowly and carefully for you, when you feel ready, you'll just make your way into a sitting position and finish there. But again, staying here as long as feels good for you, maybe even setting a timer for 5 or 10 minutes, and just letting yourself release. Once you feel all the way relaxed, you can let go of the conscious awareness of your breath and just let yourself be here. Have a wonderful day and just enjoy this practice.